This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country, and we join their calls for justice. Happy New Year!
That's fireworks.
That sounds like the dogs that are scared of the fireworks.
You know, the crackly ones?
You got any New Year's resolutions?
I don't know. I will, I assume, but here's a secret. It's actually the 16th of December when we're
Don't ruin it.
So I don't know. Sorry.
I'm going to be like you for a little bit. My New Year's resolution, my friend's getting married on Jan 7th.
Okay.
And so I'm going to have a wonderful time at that, enjoy myself.
That's your New Year's resolution? Have a wonderful time at my friend's wedding.
Have fun for once. No, do that. And then from that time, from January 7th until the final day of the Melbourne International Comedy Festival 2023, I'm going to try and not consume alcohol.
When's the comedy festival?
April. April.
That's cool.
But it's like, it's also, you're going through the gauntlet there. They're doing all these other fringe festivals around the country, and it's the summer and it's enjoyable, fun time. So getting through that while not getting on the booze, if I manage to pull that off, will be quite impressive.
Isn't it easier because you're already having so much fun? I don't know how this works. Sorry. You don't need it? I don't know.
We really are another species to you, aren't we? People who consume each other. You're having lots of fun. You go, oh, why not have a drink? Or the drink enhances the already existing fun, no?
As I understand it, some people need to drink to feel comfortable in social situations or feel they need to drink. So I guess that makes sense for what you're saying. I
love the idea of being at a great party and someone says, hey, do you want a drink? And I say, no, thank you. I'm already having heaps of fun.
Well, yeah, isn't that I'm high on life? Like, I don't need it. You know, that's me. I'm having a great time.
Talk about the Greens, that bunch of idiots.
The Greens party is a party of hate.
They want to destroy the social fabric of society.
These people, these Greens, they are snake oil salesmen.
She has described the Greens as very, very dangerous.
Frankly, I've always found the Greens to be a real serious danger to Australia.
A serious danger to Australia.
Another year of serious danger. Podcast about green politics in Australia that's not an official Greens Party podcast. Official podcast of the year 2023, though. Keep saying it. You're hearing it more and more.
You're hearing it more and more.
Made possible with the help of the Green Institute and produced by Michael the Griffin and supported by lovely donations from our wonderful Patreon subscribers who are patrons. That's how we refer to them. Because we're recording this in advance, we don't know who the new people who've signed up to our Patreon are, but thank you if you have recently. We love you. Maybe that's it can be your New Year's resolution. Hey, if you're not already a patron, become one. Do something good for yourself and the world. Get access to heaps of bonus content. Chuck in $3 a month or so. Help pay Michael the Great Griffin and support us. Keep the show going.
The economy's doing great. Now is the time to invest in independent Greens leftist podcasts.
Stock her up. Serious danger, stock her up.
Did we settle on a name for people who are patron? Did we say Danger Dogs or something? Is that what we settled on?
I haven't heard of this. Let's talk about this offline.
We did this on an episode. What? I just can't remember what we actually landed on.
We didn't, did we?
I definitely remember suggesting Danger Dogs, but anyway, carry on.
Okay. Look, this week we're talking about one of our favourite pillars, grassroots democracy. That is, for folks who don't know, one of the 4 pillars of the Greens political party. And particularly internal democracy stuff when it comes to power that our MPs have versus the membership. So we're going to be chatting about how the leader is elected and conscience voting, binding MPs to party policy. So hope no MPs are listening because, I'm about to tell you that we should be more democratic.
We're staging a coup to take away all your power. God damn it.
Yeah.
He's a mighty good leader. He's a mighty good leader. He's a mighty good leader. All the way, Lord.
Tom Ballard, did you know that despite being the best and most progressive party, the Australian Greens leader is elected by federal MPs only? What?
But we love grassroots democracy. Surely we would collectively, as a party, vote for people who have leadership positions in that party, no?
You would think. I honestly forget how many MPs we have in party room now. How many MPs do we have?
16, isn't it?
Is it 16? Yeah.
12 senators for lower house MPs.
Yeah, okay. So that used to be, that's a little bit better, but generally for a long time it's been like 10 people electing the leader of a party of many thousands of people and for whom many more thousands of people vote.
I will say in the slight defense there is, again, we'll get to this, but the internal democracy would be that, all those MPs went through a pre-selection process which was voted on by the members, which other major parties simply cannot say the same. So, yes, even though it's a very small people choosing the leader, those 10 people have gone through more of a democratic selection process than other politicians, I would say.
Somewhat, but I mean, in the case of our lower house MPs, that pre-selection process could be literally, 60 people in a branch. And for branches like, people in the ACT and NT, then they don't get any say. But anyway, yes, we'll get to that. I've
told you about how I went to Adam's pre-selection meeting, right? Have we discussed this?
No.
Did I ever tell you this? When Adam Matt was running again, I guess ahead of the 2022 election, I guess it must have been in 2021 or something.
Recently,
I joined as a member, and they had a Zoom session to go through the pre-selection the meet the candidates or whatever for the seat of Melbourne.
Was it contested?
And it was uncontested, and the only person who joined that meeting was Tom Ballard.
Oh my God! What? No, people didn't even join.
No,
that is so funny. Surely you would at least take that opportunity to ask some questions of the fucking leader of the party, but okay.
Well, I did.
Was he leader then? Yeah.
No, I did. Yes, no, he was leader. It was all on Zoom. It was a very bizarre This was months after I actually joined as a member. Anyway, very strange.
Okay. So, Greens Party internal rules history lesson from Emerald Moon, right? At the moment, under existing rules.
Sorry, I just love the idea of someone having a really big New Year's Eve and coming down, listening to this.
This is exactly what you want to hear, right? Yeah, of course.
Of course.
So only our MPs elect our leader. For a leadership spill to be triggered, it basically happens after every federal election, or if there's a vacancy, or if there's a spill motion supported by 1/3 of party room. So I assume at the moment that would be more. You would need 6 people. Presumably, to trigger a spill motion. But you're not safe, Adam, because we've got, 4 Queenslanders. No, hang on. 5 Queenslanders? I'm so sorry. 5 Queenslanders in there. So we only need 1 more and we could kick Adam Bant out. So he should be afraid. I'm sorry. Adam's a great leader. Anyway. And then, there's just a secret ballot of the MPs and they go, yep, this person.
And they announce the results and everyone has some kind of leadership position afterwards. It's great. It's a wonderful, cute system.
Yeah. Everyone gets it. Everyone gets a prize. It's very Greens. This is very unusual for progressive organizations. I read, I thought maybe at one point we were the only Greens party in the world who doesn't give members a say. There might be 1 or 2 others, but very few Greens parties in the world, and most progressive parties, in fact, even the Labor Party is better than that. They give their members more of a say on the election of their leader. They have this weighted model where 50% of the vote comes from their MPs and 50% comes from members.
Right.
A
system introduced after the insane dog shit bloodshed of the Rudd Gillard years, yes. Introduced by Kevin Rudd to make sure that would never happen again.
Well, yeah.
But it's still better, you're right.
Stability, hey. I think I would hazard a guess that most Greens members, or at least a big chunk of Greens members, don't necessarily realize this. Or at least if they realize that this is the system, they don't realize that it's unusual for a progressive party.
Well, and certainly in the Australian context, right? If every other political party doesn't operate on that system, you would understand whether that's even an option. Obviously, if you're paying attention to, say, British politics, and the massive rise of Jeremy Corbyn was a result of the Labor membership being able to vote to elect the leader, hence him being elected and changing the nature of British politics for the next half a decade. Yeah.
How do the Liberals do it? Is it just MPs for them?
Yes.
Right. So we have the Liberal model. That's awesome. So funnily enough, the timeline around this kind of conversation within the Greens, as I understand, in recent years anyway, obviously I'm sure there have been people interested in this for much longer, but in November of 2016, Richard Di Natale called for a discussion about how we elect our leader. In 2017, National Conference established a working group to progress this issue. National Conference being that meeting of all the Greens members. And then the following year, state and territory state councils held workshops. So, for example, in 2018, Queensland agreed that we want a change to provide greater membership involvement in the election of leader. Interestingly, and I actually forgot this National Council also adopted that position in 2019. So the key, like the decision-making body of the party, said they support a change to provide greater membership involvement in electing the leader.
Not necessarily full election, but an involvement of some kind of membership.
But give members some sort of a say as opposed to absolutely zero.
Yep.
So then 2018 to 2019, it was like late 2018, got the results in 2019. There was a national survey of members that also included a question on whether we should mandate co-leaders. And it was inconclusive. So it was like this non-binding survey. 58% said that they believed that the current model should not be continued. And 83% said it's important that members are involved in the election of a parliamentary leader. But National Council was like, okay, so there's a mood for change, but we don't really know what that would look like. And they then said in 2020, we need to do a plebiscite of members to decide whether we change and what model we use. Yeah, so the method for doing a plebiscite is set out in the Constitution.
Can I ask, sorry, in that survey, how many people are we talking took that initial survey in 2019? Do we know?
I actually don't know what the participation rates were.
Okay.
But it went to every member.
The survey did, okay, right.
Yeah, every member nationally. So, then we say we want to do a plebiscite. I mean, the fact that we were like, yeah, plebiscite sounds good, when I think that the marriage equality plebiscite was still very much in our minds at that time, but we were like, yeah, sounds great. And that means that it was optional preferential voting. It was this ballot that went out to everyone. You needed at least 20% participation and 66% plus in favor of something for it to go ahead. The interesting thing about this is, just quietly, as an aside, we didn't actually need to do a plebiscite. Like, there were people that argued, including myself and on behalf of Queensland at the time, that we should just do a simple majority threshold, because the election of the leader isn't actually set out in the Constitution. It's never been endorsed by members, but National Council argued that we have to do this complicated plebiscite process to put something in the Constitution about it. And do you remember the ballot that came out of this, Tom?
I do remember this. I remember you and I were talking, because I'd sort of it was, again, it must have been around the time when I actually signed up too. And it was, because it was happening in 2020. Obviously, COVID's raging around, but there was also this sort of internal debate around that. And I think that I touched base with you. We talked about it a little bit. You were organising within the party to try and, get this over the line, right? Yeah.
So there's a group, Greens for Democratic Leadership, which I think still has a Facebook page and was active like in the years leading up to this and during the plebiscite, that was pushing, campaigning internally for a democratic model. And I was talking to you about that. But I specifically asked if you remembered the ballot, because it was probably like one of the most confusing things I've ever voted in. Like, this thing was absolutely worse than like an upper house ballot, like in an election, because it was trying to test like basically it was trying to test, do we want to change what we currently have? And then it needed to test, okay, what model would we move to? And there were these two models, one being one member, one vote. So every member has a vote on who is the leader of the party, equal weighting, or the weighted model similar to what Labor has, where 50% of the vote is from the MPs and 50% is from the membership. And so it had like 3 questions, and it was weirdly repetitive. And it was like, in question 1, you say, I prefer either one member, one vote, or the status quo. And then question 2, I prefer a 50-50 model or the status quo. And then in question 3, I prefer like one member, one vote, or 50-50. Anyway, and it was because question 3 would apply only if one of the first 2 questions reached the 66% threshold. So already, like, not to be too tinfoil hat about this, I do think that it was intentionally complex. Like, I think, and maybe this is worth noting, like, there absolutely is resistance to changing this model from certain parts of the party.
Yep.
And unsurprisingly, party room at the time, obviously the constitutional party room has changed now. Who knows what the position would be now. This was a time as well, I think, this was right when the handover happened. So this was all ongoing. And then Richard Dintali stepped down, Adam came in, and Adam had seemed like open in the past to democratic election. And so I think a lot of people were disappointed when he then just took his party room endorsement and wasn't like, I want to enter the leadership on a foundation of endorsement from the members voting for me.
Oh, like, okay, like we would have liked to have seen him say, if I'm going to become the leader, then okay.
Yeah,
or, I do remember it being slightly complicated by the fact that Adam was very popular and people wanted him as the leader. So you're having the same conversation about a process thing, still very important. And I'm not saying that anyone fucked up by timing it at the same time, but it's just sort of like, yes, people were like, yes, we need to vote for our leader, and we'd vote for the guy who's currently the leader overwhelmingly. But anyway, that was just another wrinkle in the conversation.
Yeah, it made things extra confusing. There was a whole lot of that was like shifting, and then there was these a coalition of MPs, I think, including folks like Bob Brown and maybe even RDN, like kind of older guard Greens with a lot of sway and influence in the party, who were doing
I think Christine Milne came out against that as well. Yes,
publishing articles on why the Greens should not allow democratic election of the leader during this. I remember reading that article and feeling positively sick to my stomach. I stand by that. And in the end, the results were that neither model received that 66% threshold. So confusingly, because it was optional preferential as well, like because more people voted on certain questions than others, the 50-50 model received 62.56% support as opposed to the status quo. And the one member, one vote model received 62% support as opposed to the status quo, but it received more votes. So 3,721 votes for one member, one vote. Right. 3,510 for a 50-50 model. And so we did this plebiscite because we were like, we did a survey, it was unclear. Now we need a plebiscite to finally solve this once and for all. We get the results and it's like, we have no idea. Like, what we do know is that on the terms of this plebiscite, we can't change. We have the status quo. But like, we're also kind of, both sides can now argue that the membership wants one thing. Like, there's no clear kind of endorsement from the membership of one thing or another.
But it's just so overwhelming support for change to the status quo. But because you can't get that, then we don't get any change to the status quo.
That's right. So MPs still elect the bloody leader. What I am curious about, I mean, this wasn't that long ago. It was, 2, maybe 3 years ago now. Do you think it would be different now, though, the result?
So, I mean, I can't even remember, Adam. So my memory was Maureen Faruqi did, like, there were some workshops. So I maybe attended one or two, like, just Zoom conferences, conversations between people. I remember, I think Abigail Boyd was in favour of members directly electing. Maureen Faruqi was, from memory. Nick McKim was opposed. But I honestly don't remember where Adam sort of sat in that kind of conversation. I think if there was a new internal democracy thing and Adam was heavily endorsing the idea of going to an election to elect the party, I think that it would do pretty well, yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, is that, like I said, I think it was disappointing at the time, and I still remain disappointed that Adam kind of got elected as leader and was just totally silent on this thing. I think he go either way. Okay.
The furthest he might have gone is he might have been like, membership involvement would be good.
Yep.
And so, but does that mean support for this hybrid model where MPs still get, thousands more votes effectively than ordinary members?
Yeah.
Who knows? So we still don't even really know our leader's position on this. And I wonder, though, whether now him kind of having led the party for some time, having more of an established position as leader, led the party through one of, our most successful election yet.
Yeah.
He might feel more confident taking a position on this.
Sure.
Or would he just, have settled into the status quo that's benefited him and be like, I think we should leave it as is. I think it's working pretty well.
It's working great. And I don't know. I'd like to think he would, his default or broader political vision endorses greater democracy, both within the party. I think that's certainly true. And I think the new energy around the party, the increase in membership and the momentum that the party has in the wake of these results this year means that I reckon there's an appetite for just, pursuing our principles and doing all the stuff that makes us different to the other parties. So I think, again, you'd probably hopefully do pretty well. But also with a slightly different national council than, isn't there a new one? Or
they're elected every year.
Yeah, right.
I don't know who is on it at the moment. Obviously, I think they were just elected. I'm never going back. Let's just say that. But who knows? It absolutely, it was a National Council project. That was probably one of the major things that I worked on when I was on National Council as Queensland's delegate. And so, yeah, a new council might approach it totally differently. But it's worth noting again that Party Room, for some reason, has a vote on National Council, and I think even sometimes like effectively a veto at times on National Council, even though each member body already also has a vote. And why is Party Room a thing when it doesn't represent any members other than the MPs? But anyway, that's just I don't think Party Room should have a vote on National Council. There, yeah. I said it. But yeah, like you're right. Like again, I cannot stress enough that it is literally one of the 4 pillars is grassroots participatory democracy of the party. And we do not allow any membership say in who leads the party. And the argument that I guess, you were alluding to is kind of that representative democracy. We don't have a direct participatory democracy model. We have a representative one where members pre-select their MPs who then go and choose the members. But as I say, might make slightly more sense if we're only talking about senators where the whole state will vote. Yeah. But even so, if your state or territory doesn't have any senators, then you don't have any representation. Right. Or if we're just talking about lower house MPs, of which we now have 4, those are just 4 branch, or I guess if there are some that might have multiple branches involved, but like a handful of branches that hold a significant chunk of power on who represents the whole party, all of the members.
Yeah, democracy is really good. If we're serious about that, then we should do it everywhere all the time as much as possible, Yes, otherwise it looks like a certain group of people are hoarding power and don't want to be accountable to the membership. So, yes, I mean, you and I both voted for and were sort of vocal about it. We talked about the fact that we supported this kind of new model. And there are some other benefits too, really, to having that kind of open, direct democracy leadership model too, right? Like it gets people more engaged with and involved in what the party is about, and just make the sort of the conversations and the campaigning within the party more robust. And if everyone feels like there's a say rather than certain people making moves behind the scenes, then people feel better about the party, right?
Yeah, I mean, why would you join an organization if there's really no difference by you joining? Like I would argue that, if you look at declining union membership, for example, I would say that obviously relates to the power that unions hold in the workplace, but probably also to the fact that for most people, their experience of joining a union or their impression of joining a union would be that they don't actually have that much influence over what the union does, because it is largely led by a small handful of kind of executives who have the real power and, under direction from the Labor Party even. So that's similarly for the Greens. Like when you actually have a say in what the party does, then you're going to want to join because you'll be like, well, I want to have a say in this. Yeah. Which is why, like, explicitly, I do not support a hybrid model. I don't support this weighted model 50-50 thing like what Labor has, because it still is like in 2013, I understand this is one of the key arguments against it. It's like in 2013, Labor members voted for Albanese as their leader, but the MPs overruled them in this factional deal and they appointed Bill Shorten instead. And so, to put ourselves in a situation where the membership could express one view and then the MPs effectively just overrule it, like it would be disastrous.
Yeah. So it's not even a 50-50 deal in Labor, really, is it? It is like 50+1 in regards to the party room, the Parliamentary Labor Party. Like, yes, they have more power. I mean, again, I keep going back to British politics. Like the reaction from the Labor right in the party post-Corbyn, just like the way that central body is just completely like weeding out all leftists in the memberships and just cutting away at internal democracy to the point where they produced lists of who's even allowed to stand for consideration for pre-selection. Like it is just this centralisation, concentration of power in the hands of conservative people who will never, ever let the Labor Party get anywhere near Corbynist socialism ever again. Yet it's brutal, this kind of purge that's going through now. And I think you see elements of that in the Australian Labor Party, and we don't want that in the Greens, please.
But there's sort of this, one of the most common arguments that I saw around the time of the plebiscite, and you still see it, is people who are like, well, I'm just a member. What do I know about who's best to be the leader? And they'll even kind of use, the technical definition. What we're talking about here is the parliamentary leader. And that's just, the role is just to coordinate the party room. And that's the person that is effectively the manager for our MPs, which, like, First of all, bullshit. They are not
Yes.
like a glorified whip position. They are the figurehead of the party. They front the press conferences. They answer the questions when something goes wrong. They decide the portfolio allocations. They have 22 or 24 staff as opposed to like 3 or 4 for every other MP. They have an enormous amount of power, and they set the tone for the whole party. Like, so I think to argue that they're just a manager, and for that reason, like the MPs know best because they're the ones who have to work with this person, so they should be the ones who have a say. It's like, no, this is a representative for our entire movement, and I think we should trust the members to be able to pick who they think represents them as that movement.
It's just like, what do I know? I don't deserve a vote. Well, you vote in the federal election, for fuck's sake. You vote for your local MPs on issues, and you vote on lots of other things.
You're not in
the
parliament.
Party. Come on, man. And this was really frustrating. You know, it's disappointing in my conversation with Nick McKim. I appreciated him coming on my podcast at the time and having the conversation, being honest about his position. But it was sort of basically like, what if we don't get along? Like all these internal personal dramas amongst the party room, and how that should dictate like who becomes the leader. And my response to that was, grow the fuck up. Grow the fuck. This is your job. You've been elected by people to do that. You respect democracy broadly. I'm sorry, work through your issues within the party room. A group of 16 people now who all broadly.
If you can't, we've got bigger problems.
Yeah, we've got much bigger problems if you can't sort of get over sort of personal beefs or whatever. And I don't know, I couldn't help but think that this is the scenario in their head is something like, well, what if a Lee Rhiannon were to be elected leader of the party? Then we'd be in serious trouble, and that wouldn't be acceptable. And you kind of go,
well, if that's what the
well,
members
if that's what
wanted,
the members of your party want, then you got to respect that.
You're the problem. Like, am I so wrong? I mean, and there's this argument about like friction and conflict and it causing more drama, internal disputes that will make the party appear and be disunified. And there was a great quote that I found in one of the flyers that the Greens for Democratic Leadership developed at the time of the plebiscite, which is that democratic leadership elections actually discourage factionalism, since all candidates need to make their case to members instead of building personal networks of loyalty with other insiders. By contrast, factions thrive where power is concentrated in a few hands, especially when there are juicy favors to dole out to loyal supporters.
Yes.
So, I mean that's exactly it. It's actually and like, if the MPs have to be accountable to the membership when they want to hold a leadership spill, it's not like democratic election is going to mean, there's these constant fucking spills and we'll always be trying to, overturn the leader. That's far more likely to happen when you can just do that behind closed doors. The model that's proposed, MPs would have to, like 20% of the party room could nominate someone for leadership, or a certain threshold of members could call a spill. I really don't think that there's going to be these like rolling leadership spills when you have to go through a whole internal election. And I find like maybe this has come up on the podcast before, but there is this thread of argument sometimes within the party that like all internal campaigning is bad and like seeds disunity and is like something that we as Greens shouldn't do. And I'm like, no, internal campaigning is fucking good. Like, justify to me why you represent me and my movement. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm a member.
Yeah. I'll tell you what is fucking bonkers is like, again, in the UK, for those two major parties, when there's like a leadership spill, it's like a very big public deal. Like people go on TV. They have TV debates between the contenders for the leadership. Now, obviously for the recent Conservative thing when Boris Johnson was kicked out, it was a very big deal because whoever won that was going to become the Prime Minister, for fuck's sake. But all voted on Tory members, like the membership, which eventually selected Liz Truss. Although there is a process in which the MPs decide who are the candidates that the membership votes on. So that sort of was the first thing. But but like literally TV debates to decide the leader of a political party, which is
like, and if you're saying that, you are as a party meant to be representing like a broad section of society in politics, that kind of makes sense. And also like, I want to see how you campaign as well. I want to see how you represent yourself and our movement as a leader before I kind of put my confidence in you. I mean, the other thing, maybe it's just briefly touching on though, like, do you have thoughts on co-leaders?
I was thinking something that I thought was remiss of us not to ask Daniel Lopez from the Victorian Socialists. Like there is no leader of the Victorian Socialists as I understand it. All the interviews I saw were all on specific candidates in their respective seats or their districts that they were running in. So that's sort of interesting. And I'm sure that there is a big focus on horizontalism and, hierarchy is the enemy of the Victorian socialists. That's for true. That's for sure. But I think whether it's a leader or a co-leader is kind of mandating one either way isn't so important to me. Often for office bearer positions in local branches, people say, oh, this could be a co-sharing role. We could run, two candidates could run as co-leaders if that's what they wanted to do. I think giving that option is totally fine. But mandating one way or the other, I don't have particularly strong feelings on it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, because the New South Wales Greens don't have a leader either, do they?
Yeah, right. I was thinking about it. Yeah, it's like you never. Yeah,
they actually they specifically intentionally don't have a leader. Queensland Greens, because we only have 2 MPs, we don't have a leader yet. I think once we get over 3, then we would 3 or 4.
Right. Yep.
But yeah, the argument about whether to have a leader or not, I support having a leader, and I probably support having one leader over co-leaders. Our current rules allow for co-leaders; they don't mandate one way or the other, which I think is fine, I guess, if that's really what the membership wanted. But I think it almost the implication behind co-leaders is we're investing so much power in this position, and it's I don't know, I just think that rather you should be recognizing the role that the leader does play, which is that figurehead position. I think it just makes sense for that to be one person who then consults with the party and represents that to the world, and that's their job. I think honestly it can get confusing with co-leaders, but it is done elsewhere. Is it not New Zealand? Is it New Zealand Green Party maybe as co-leaders?
I want to say New Zealand maybe, yes. I think so. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have super strong feelings about it, but I know some people who are really if we were really grassroots, we were really democratic, we wouldn't have a leader at all. I'm not sure I agree with that.
Yeah. If the leader is democratically elected, then I'm all for it, I say, yes.
Yes. We'll put some, just before we move on to our next convo, I'll chuck some links in the show notes to a couple of good articles about the election of the leader. There's one that Jono wrote about what role the actual leader plays and kind of undoing that idea that they are just a manager of the party room. And there's also one from Dylan Griffiths from New South Wales about why we need democratic election, 1 member, 1 vote. So we can link them in the show notes.
All right, sir, I guess I'll just have to speak to the people of my state from right here. And I'll tell you one thing, that wild horses aren't going to drag me off this floor until those people have heard everything I've got to say, even if it takes all winter.
I remember... This is one of my things that I remember from my politics course in uni was learning
Taught by the smartest man in Australian politics.
The smartest man, Paul Williams, who is. I saw an article that he was quoted in recently, finally acknowledging that maybe the Greens will win more seats in Queensland. I was like, it took you a while, buddy, didn't it? Anyway, and he was saying, yeah,
good stuff.
He was he's obviously a Laborite and was talking about conscience votes and crossing the floor, and the fact that the LNP allows their members to cross the floor on a vote, whereas Labor doesn't. And he was like, isn't that funny that in this instance, the LNP is actually more democratic than the Labor Party? And I was like, oh, okay, writing down my notes. And so only later when this came up, when I was on National Council, again, one of my first National Council meetings, and I was like, what the fuck is this? And we were talking about conscience votes and binding MPs to policy. Did my perception of it kind of switch to be like, oh, actually it's not very democratic to place the decision solely within the hands of this one person rather than, or the party room even, rather than the policy that's developed by the entire membership in the case of the Greens through a consensus decision-making process.
Right. So maybe just for absolute clarity, do you mind explaining what do you mean when you say binding an MP to policy?
Yeah. So requiring them in the Constitution to vote and act, often it'll say, but usually vote is what we're talking about, in accordance with Greens policy.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Because Greens policy is democratically decided by the membership.
Yeah.
But there's no strict constitutional obligation on those Greens MPs to vote exactly in accordance with whatever policy the membership comes up with.
No. So at a federal level, the Australian Greens Constitution doesn't bind MPs to policy. It says, it basically is they'll adhere to the policies of the Greens except where it conflicts with their duty to their constituents or their conscience. So,
right.
Yeah, their conscience or duty to constituents. But there's an exception in that part of the Constitution of the Australian Greens for New South Wales and Queensland because our state constitutions do bind our MPs. Like Queensland's, for example, says that actions and activities of all members of the Greens in public office will be consistent with the Charter, Principles, Code of Ethics and Policy Platform of the Greens.
Okay.
Yeah.
God, duty to your constituents, that's fucking broad. That feels like something you can twist almost anything. I don't want to.
Especially, that's right. No, it's very broad. It basically means, you don't have to vote in accordance with party policy. And interestingly, I mean, this is getting into the weeds and the kind of technicalities around a little bit, but one of the things that I discovered when this was a topic in front of National Council is that party rooms rules, the little rules that they have for operating, define a conscience vote as voting against the party room decision. So like they have rules around MPs being able to or not able to do that. But they define it as, like what party room decides. But what we're talking about is when a party room decision conflicts with policy.
Right.
So and in the Queensland Greens, for example, we say that if an MP believes that a decision that the party room has made is in conflict with policy, then they'll be bound by policy instead of the party room decision.
Right.
Which probably reminds people of a particular instance. There is one situation where this came up. God, it must have been, was it 2017, the Lee Rhiannon stuff?
Sounds about right. Yes, it was still
Turnbull. Or 2016 even.
Turnbull, something like that. Turnbull's still Prime Minister. It's around Gonski funding.
Yeah.
And basically, this is for all from memory. Please correct me if I fuck this up. And I'm still yet to read Paddy Manning's Inside the Greens, in which I'm sure this is all laid out in detail. But basically, the Liberals and the Greens were working on some kind of arrangement around education funding. And the party room decided to do something of a deal that wasn't the full Gonski, that would commit Labor to, that would commit the Greens to voting for something that wasn't the full Gonski.
Yeah.
New South Wales Greens policy was to support the full Gonski program.
Yeah.
New South Wales Senator Lee Rhiannon said, therefore, I cannot agree with this party room decision, and I am holding out my vote, or I will vote against this, basically. I'm not actually sure what happened there. And within that caused a huge rupture within the party room to the point where she was censured, I think, by the rest of the other Greens party room or something like that.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what happened, but they had a go at her. They
said it was bad. And Bob Brown came out extremely hard. Bob Brown, who appears to have never really gotten on particularly well with Lee Rhiannon. They've come to blows many times. Obviously, they have some pretty different political views and worldviews, and in particular on matters of, say, capitalism or a political orientation, I suppose. They've come into conflict quite a bit. Yeah. And that kind of interstate conflict or tensions that is brought out through this federal body system sort of really came to the fore there, yeah.
Yeah, I think this is one of those ones like where you kind of get an insight into the different cultures and approaches of the different states in the Greens that make up the Australian Greens. Like New South Wales, I think, are quite staunch on this.
Well, this was Lee Rhiannon's defence. Is like I have no choice here.
She's bound. Yeah,
I am bound by this constitution to do what the members tell me to do, and the members told me to do something that was in conflict with the federal party room decision. And she viewed her role and took that pretty seriously, having been pre-selected and voted for by the members to honour that obligation.
Yeah, and as I understand it, the Queensland Greens, the constitutional provision binding our MPs to policy happened after it was, I would say, kind of in response to this, where we were like, if this kind of thing happens again, we want our MPs to have to vote in accordance with our policy, not with the party room. And so that's why we changed our constitution and asked for us to be exempted from those Australian Greens provisions.
Yeah, right. I believe there was also some kind of, Lee Rhiannon did go back to the membership to also canvass people's opinions ahead of making that decision too. So there was a level of consultation and, increased democratic input into that decision too.
Well, because this is the other thing as well. That the problem is our policy platform itself is very vague. So the policy platform that's endorsed by members, it's intentionally broad. It's made up of these principles and aims that certainly are not exhaustive. They don't cover every instance. And when we're not in government, we're responding to government legislation that is made on the basis of from a totally different starting point. And will often include stuff that is either not specifically mentioned in our policy or there would be varying interpretations of how our policy would apply. And so I don't necessarily know, like it sounds as though, I think in the Lee Rhiannon instance, the Gonski instance, it was like fairly clear that this wasn't consistent with policy, but certainly there are a lot of situations where I've seen our policy is silent. Like, for example, when we were dealing with COVID-19 public health directions stuff, that there was really no direction for our MPs in a lot of our policy. And so how do they kind of make that up? Like, I think that's a big question that certainly from what I've seen in the Queensland Greens, we're still working out what happens when our MPs have to vote on something that's not explicitly dealt with by policy. How do you consult the membership or...
Right.
Yeah.
Which is like, that's going to happen all the time because stuff comes up and enters into politics and becomes an issue, well outside the policy-making process of a party. That takes ages and there's lots of deliberation, and it's around things like education or health or the environment, et cetera. Like, these big sort of topics and these things that we believe in and things we want to fight for. But yeah, war could be declared or something, or a pandemic kicks off and suddenly, there is an element to which these MPs are empowered to act in response to the situation. In the Lee Rhiannon case, I think Lee Rhiannon was like, we pretty clearly took a position on this. We support the Gonski review and implementing that in full, and that's not what the Liberals want to do. Therefore, I'm against it.
Yeah. I mean, would you argue that the climate bill was inconsistent? Because it's inconsistent with the targets that we have in our policy in terms of emissions reduction. I think that's one where it's often difficult. It's like when we have an incremental change that is not the full change that we would want in our policy, but is maybe an improvement on the status quo, the interpretations of whether or not that's consistent with policy could differ.
Well, then there's also, is the 75% reduction target, is that in the official policy platform?
Actual policy platform, that's a good question.
Oh, you're not sure?
No.
Because I think this is also complicated by the fact that during an election campaign, as I understand it, the leader's office and the federal MPs come up with policy initiatives, which are like ideas that we're going to campaign on and talk about a lot, which are somewhat distinct and not necessarily an official part of the Greens' official party platform. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I think it works similarly at a federal level, but I'll speak more to the Queensland level just because that's what I'm sure of. Like in Queensland, the Queensland Campaigns Committee develops initiatives that have to be they have to be consistent with the policy. But like I said, the policy is very vague. So they can fully make up the numbers, the details, an interpretation of a principle that's in policy and turn it into an initiative. And that's actually what we put to voters every election and we'll probably introduce bills on and things like that. And there are, I know Jono Sri Ranganathan, for example, consistently argues that maybe there should be more membership involvement in developing initiatives since that's such a big part of that's effectively the platform.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, I don't know if writing those sorts of initiatives is really possible to do by committee or in consultation with the membership, but it's true that kind of adds a whole other layer of complication to things.
That's another layer. And that's probably a whole other episode of the podcast about how, you develop policy and how that stuff sort of comes up. But just coming back to your original point about, is it good or bad that people can cross the floor over conscience vote? I mean, first of all, the Greens party room at the moment, no one can really cross the floor, really, can they? Because we're obviously not on either side of either government or opposition.
Well, yeah.
And has that and there's also the consensus decision making, which is a big part of the Greens party room as well, which I think is what sort of broke down in the Lee Rhiannon case, which was very rare. Normally the party room does talk incessantly and endlessly until they actually feel like they can come out with a consensus position that might not be 100% what everybody wanted, but is something that the whole party room could get behind.
Yeah.
So the Lee Rhiannon thing was extraordinary in that it was a case in which that was not
they couldn't reach
that's
consensus.
Not where they ended up, right? And is that really the only case of the federal Greens party room splitting on anything? Has any Greens MP ever voted differently to the rest of their comrades?
Oh, I don't know. My history is not up on this. I actually don't know.
I'd say probably not. I feel like we'd probably know about it if we did.
Yeah. But I think what the interesting thing is, if we talk about crossing the floor, I would say that a lot of people would think, if Lee Rhiannon, for example, Lee Rhiannon is crossing the floor in voting against the party room decision, but they would maybe not distinguish that from a conscience vote, as in voting against party policy. So there's this thing, it really annoys me. I mean, it's a query that we would get often during the election. I remember when I was doing the media for the Queensland Greens candidates, and people say stuff like, what's the issue that you would cross the floor on?
Yeah.
Like, what's an issue that, you would vote against? And I mean, for us, it's like, well, nothing, because I'm bound to party policy, and trying to explain that to an ordinary voter and a non-super nerd, like, our policies are endorsed through a consensus decision-making process by the members, and, we believe in grassroots democracy and believe that's more democratic. It doesn't really work, because people kind of instinctively, they see it as this, like, maverick thing that someone will stand up for their beliefs and potentially, stand up for their electorate and their constituents by crossing the floor, which, again, I'm like, but if they have to do that to stand up for their constituents and their beliefs, why are they in that party?
Right. Yeah, sure. Look, I think people like the idea of conscience votes because they hate politics and they hate people telling them one thing, and they think that the system of politics corrupts people, which is totally true, and so that people are regularly voting and saying things that they don't believe, or they're lying, right? So a conscience vote going against the apparatchiks of your own party because of something you really believe in, does in some instances come across as the admirable or the right thing to do. I mean, Petra Giorgio crossing the floor on refugee policy sort of comes to mind, for example.
Yeah.
Now, in the Labor Party, where you can't cross the floor because all the Labor MPs are bound by whatever the party room decides, you've sort of got the worst of both worlds. They both can't demonstrate a level of independence or conscience to cross the vote because of what they believe in, but they're not doing that because they're bound by the membership, right? Like the Parliamentary Labor Party is considerably to the right of the Labor membership, and the Labor membership comes up with stuff all the time that is, passes ALP conference or whatever, never goes anywhere because the Parliamentary Party says, fuck them. We're not actually going to do the things they say just because they're members of our party. So, yeah, Labor's really like the worst of both worlds. At least in the Liberal Party, I guess every now and again someone might not be a complete demon lizard and will sort of take the correct position on a social progress question, perhaps. But Labor Party, not so much.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting. Like, I think actually that's a good take, that it's true that, like, people want, they like someone who'll cross the floor, quote unquote, or a party that'll allow conscience votes because they hate politicians and it's the same thing.
People love independents and teals, right? Because they're
exactly.
There's no ideology and they're going to look at an issue and they're going to make a call either way.
Yeah. But this is the whole point, is that, like, so you hate politicians and so you want to place all of the power in the hands of this one politician to make the decision here. Like, that sounds pretty fucking stupid to me. Why would you not place it in the hands of, like, a membership base that is open to anyone? And also, if we're talking about service to constituents, like, I want to be confident that my MP is going to vote in accordance with the platform on which I elected them. Yes. So, like, obviously not everyone in the electorate voted for this person, but, like, the person that was the least hated, because that's how our preferential voting system works.
Yes.
They came to the election with a clear platform.
Yes.
And people know what they're getting. No fucking surprises. That's how it works with, binding MPs, as we do in the Greens. I don't want someone to I don't want to vote Labor because I support abortion rights and then have my MP get up and vote against it. Because that's one thing that, Labor, I assume across the country, but I know, like, in Queensland at least, they can have conscience votes on, I think it's matters of life and death, or however they word it, that's what it means. So they had a conscience vote on abortion rights in Queensland and on voluntary assisted dying laws, for example.
Yeah. Here's your question for you. Do you think that MPs whose seats voted against marriage equality should voted for what their seat wanted or what they believed in and what they campaigned on?
Yeah, like when there's a conflict between your party and your electorate.
Yep, few Labor MPs, particularly who represent Western city suburbs, their home seats would have voted, the majority of people in that plebiscite who did, it wasn't a compulsory plebiscite, but still pretty high participation rate, voted no, and those Labor MPs all voted yes.
I would still say that you were elected as a Labor MP, and if your party policy, like, that you came to the election with was to support marriage equality, then that's how you should vote. And, like, if people voted for you knowing that was in your platform, like, vote for what you believe in, Yeah.
Also, why do we have a fucking plebiscite then? But that's again another issue.
Well, let's not. Oh, fucking hell. Democracy.
Democracy,
I don't know about call to action. People, look, Greens for Democratic Leadership, like I said, I think maybe the Facebook page still exists, but I don't know if it's really a thing. But you could maybe talk to your branch about how we can get the conversation around democratic election of leaders started again. Maybe you bring a motion to your state council or national council or conference, and we can please just get our fucking party's shit together when it comes to democratically electing the leader.
That'd be very nice, please. The last post on the Facebook page was May 12th, 2020.
Okay,
but,
so it's
got
basically
some nice
retired after the plebiscite. There's this beautiful video on there. Like, there's this rousing video that group made that's like, from humble beginnings, like, we've grown as a movement, now's our time.
Yeah.
I remain hopeful. And maybe, and same, like, I would even say similarly, if you are a Greens member outside of New South Wales or Queensland, maybe chat about whether your MPs should be bound to vote in accordance with the policy that you, a member, have a say on.
And look, I think I mentioned this briefly before on one of our Patreon apps. You know, this is an issue for me personally in the Victorian state branch. Just had a new constitution that was passed. And one of the measures in the constitution was expanding the amount of time in which a new member can vote on pre-selections. Now, it also means voting for state council. I don't really care about that too much. I think if you need to take longer for you to vote on the state council, maybe, I guess, I don't know. It's a very boring internal kind of problem. But certainly people join the Greens and expect pretty quickly to be able to vote on who's going to represent them in an upcoming election. During an election year is when people often, sign up. That's when we get the biggest surge of membership. That's when young people particularly get involved. And if you were to join the Greens and say, you can't vote in who's going to be your local Greens candidate this election because that ban lasts for an entire year, I think that's fucking crazy. A year. It was 3 months. It was extended to a year under this new constitution, right? And this argument that it's like going to prevent branch stacking or some bullshit. It's just like, come on, guys. This is crazy. And this is really against our policy. We literally encourage people to become members so that you can have a say, unlike in those other parties, about who's going to be your candidate. So if you're serious about grassroots democracy, if it's a goddamn pillar, then pillar it up,
Yeah.
The warmth of your love's like the warmth from the sun, and this will be our year, took a long time to come. Don't let go of my hand now, the darkness has gone. This will be our year, took a long time to come.
Happy New Year, Greens.
Yes.
We are an unofficial Greens Party podcast.
We are an official Greens for Democratic Leadership podcast. But
we're renaming.
Anyway, more democracy 2023, everyone. That'd be good.
Yeah. And more reviews of our show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening now, please. Please go and do that. It helps grow the show. It also helps us when you share our little clips or, engage with our content on the social medias. We are on @SeriousDangerAU on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. We post the full videos of our heads on YouTube. If you've only ever listened to audio, maybe you want to go and have a look at what we look like when we are talking. Maybe you don't. Just put a sticker over Tom's head. Just kidding. We have all the links are at seriousdangerpod.com. If you have more stuff that you want us to talk about in the coming year, got some ideas for content, email us. hello@seriousdangerpod.com.
Very quickly too, there will be an episode in which Emerald is away. You're going to be on lovely holidays in Etoria. How do you say it again?
I don't know.
Etoria, New Zealand. I'm going to have a guest host joining me on the show, but I hope you have a great break, Emerald, and you will be back later
Tom.
in Jan.
I will.
Peace.
Serious danger to Australia.